certified cicerone, and Disney asked me to come in today and talk a little bit about ciders. Kind of walk you guys through the ciders that are going to be at the Cider House. And I have a couple little things to tell you guys. If you do have any questions, I'll either raise your hand, and if I don't see you, cough really loudly because I'm short. So if you have any questions, just raise your hands. I'll ask if people have questions too. The more interactive you make it, the better experience everybody's going to have. So if I don't know the answer, I'll make up something super creative that you won't know the difference. No, I'm joking. I'll let you know. I don't know everything, but hopefully I'll be able to answer any questions people have today. So we're going to talk about ciders today, which is a little bit different. Usually we talk about a lot of beer, craft beer, and wine at different events that we do. But we've seen since a surge in cider and the popularity of it, we wanted to focus a little bit and tell people what it's about. So how many people in here are familiar with craft beer? So craft beer is super hot right now, right? Well, craft ciders fall into the same category as craft beer, except it's not really beer. It's actually closer to wine than it is beer. They have different ways that they're made, different ways that they're sold. So beer has water, hops, barley, and yeast in it, whereas cider is actually just apples, some of the natural yeast, and sometimes they add in a little bit more, and then water, and then anything else they put into it. So they're made completely different. Just like grapes in wine, the terroir of where the apples are grown is an important component of what you're going to taste. So apples are grown in the United States, mostly up north. New York State is a major producer for apples. They're actually the #2 in the country producer of apples. And then you have the Vermont region, and also California grows some apples as well. So if you are a cidery down south, you're probably getting your apples from somewhere else. So a lot of times if you see a cidery or a meadery down in the south part of the United States, they're bringing in their apple juice from someplace else. So the way that it's made is you take the apples and you press them, and you take all the juices out, and then you filter it. Then you do a fermentation. It's usually a cold fermentation where they drop the temperature, and what it does is it's a nice slow process that allows the aromas of the apples to come out, so you don't lose that during the fermentation process. Then, at that point, they add in the other stuff. So today you're going to have one that has pear in it, you're going to have one that has black cherries, and then you're going to have one that has blueberries in it. All of these ciders are pretty unique. They are all very popular. The first one that I'm going to walk you through on your card is the Sonoma. This is called the Pitchfork. It's from Sonoma Cidery out in California. They're an organic cidery, so they actually use their own apples to produce this. They're USDA organic. And they add pear juice into this. So how many of you have heard of like a pear cider before? So most pear ciders are actually called a perry, and they don't use apples. They use pear as the base. This is unique in the fact that it is going to have an apple base, and they add pear into it, and they do that to add a creaminess to it. Now, the trick with adding pears into cider is pears are pretty sweet. They're full of sugar, so in order to make it, they put a lot of work into making sure that they don't add all those sugars into it, but they also get that creaminess in the mouthfeel. So if you want to take a sample of your first one, this is the Pitchfork Pear from Sonoma Cider.
The top left?
Yes, top left. Very delicate, not overly sweet. Now, in order to be classified a cider in the United States, which cider, unlike beer, is regulated by the FDA, you have to be below 5.5% in alcohol. So almost all of these are today, and I'll tell you later which one isn't, but these all run in around 5.5% alcohol.
What if it's over? What do you call it?
You are now an apple wine. Yep. You become an apple wine once you hit 5.6. And then there is, beyond that, you've heard of apple brandy. What'd you guys think of that one? Pretty nice, delicate, not overly sweet. Now, another popular way to drink ciders is to put them over ice. So a lot of people ask for their cider over ice because it cuts down on the cloyness of it just even a little bit more. So you're not going to have an overly sweet product when you add the ice to it. Very popular. It's actually how I drink my cider, is usually over ice. So the next one that we're going to have is number 2, which is on your top right. This is McKenzie's. McKenzie's is from West Seneca, New York, so it's an upstate New York product. Although I live in Florida now, I am from upstate New York, so this one is pretty exciting for me because it's close to my hometown. Now, again, a nice apple base. Their apples do come from New York State. They use a producer up there to come up with their apple blend, which is usually a proprietary blend of apples. So there's hundreds of types of apples you can use to make cider. Usually not everybody advertises exactly which blend they're using. It's sort of their secret recipe. All they have to tell you is that it's apples. That's part of being in the FDA rules, is you have to list your ingredients on the bottle. So you can't have it too secret. With beer, you don't have to list the ingredients. With cider, you'll see it usually has the ingredients, the calorie content listed.
Yes. Why is there a difference between cider and beer? Is it because it's a fruit-based?
Yes, so it's a fruit-based, and it's actually made similar to the way wine is. Cider was more popular when beer... people were making more ciders at home than they were beer at one time. So that's why the FDA got involved and said, hey, we're going to regulate this, because that's what they do. They want you to know what you're drinking. That, and there's such a distinction between a cider, an apple wine, and then the apple brandy. They want to be very clear on what you're getting. If you look into it, you'll be able to tell easily what your ABVs on these products are, where beer actually legally doesn't have to tell you how much alcohol is in it. Yes?
Look, I assume all ciders have to have apple as the base. That's what makes them cider.
Uh-huh.
But could you make the same process with just another fruit besides apple?
You can. So if you use pear, it's a perry. If you use grapes, it's a wine.
Okay.
Yeah, you've seen peach wines before. So the next cider that we're actually going to talk about, they have a winery called Keel and Curley out of Plant City, Florida. They make a lot of fruit-based wines, strawberry, blueberry, peach. They have a key lime one. So they make the next cider. But before that, I want to finish telling you about McKenzie's real quick. McKenzie's, they add sweet black cherries to it. So they do use real black cherry juice. It's not an artificial flavor that's in there. It's all natural. To give it a touch of sweetness. So this one here is a little bit sweeter, but it's not overly sticky, jammy sweet.
I guess I'm just surprised that it's not darker in color using the black cherries. Is there a reason for that?
No, usually when you look at juice and when you think of your typical juices, the amount of food coloring that's added to them to give them what you think they should look like is pretty relevant. So use key lime pie as example. How many green key lime pies have you seen versus how green is key lime juice really? So it's a similar concept. So for the next one, I'm really excited about this one. This one is actually a blueberry cider from Keel and Curley. Now Keel and Curley is part of Two Henrys. Again, like I told you, beer and wine are different. So Two Henrys is the brewery. They are out of Plant City, but they have a winery also. So they produce the cider in their craft beer house, and they take the fruit from Plant City. So this is actually their own blueberries. So they do bring in the apples for it, but Florida doesn't have a lot of big apple production. So they bring in the apples, but they use their own blueberries to make this. So this one is actually about 6% alcohol, so it's a little bit higher. And you're going to get touches, nice notes of vanilla in this one, blueberry. It's darker, so blueberry juice is actually pretty dark, so you can get that color in this one. A really nice one. So a cool thing about Two Henrys, I happen to know the owners over there. Their brewery is named after the Two Henrys who helped develop business in Florida, out in Plant City, Henry Plant and Henry Flagler. They were real big in the railroad business and building hotels, so their brewery pays homage to those folks, which is a fun little story considering they use the local ingredients and help grow local business that way. I do think that it's pretty fitting that we are drinking cider in the Thomas Jefferson room today. Cider has been around for a very long time. Thomas Jefferson was known to offer the cider he made on his farm instead of the Bordeaux that he kept in his cellar to guests. 1 out of every 10 farms in America before the Civil War actually had a cidery on site where they made their own cider. It's not really hard to make. I wouldn't, not telling anybody to go home and make it, but when you think about the natural occurrence of yeast inside fruit, and then just putting it in water and letting it warm up and ferment for a while, it's pretty easy to make, and it's pretty refreshing too. So it has a real high acceptance on the palate. Yes?
What type of apples are most common making ciders?
There's actually a cider apple variety that's most common, but a lot of people use McIntosh. I saw it was probably one of the more popular ones too. There's hundreds of apples, and I'd be lying if I said I knew all the ones that were most common. I do think it is a blend to get the flavor of sweetness to tartness right for all of the ciders.
Do regions affect the taste similar to the way wines
Yep,
do?
yep. So the terroir will affect the taste differently. You'll have sweeter apples growing in different regions, similar to the way you do with wine. So New York State is going to produce some sweeter ones because of the colder climates up there. The frost and such up there will definitely affect the sweetness of those apples. So the last sample that we have, this is actually not a cider, this is a beer. Why am I throwing that in there? This is because we're going to make a snakebite out of it. So hopefully you have a little bit of cider left. But we're offering snakebites this year at the festival, which is equal parts of lager and cider. So if you take the, I believe you're doing the blueberry, or McKenzie's? McKenzie's. So the McKenzie's, if you take 1 part McKenzie's cherry, which was your top right, and 1 part of the lager, you're going to have a snakebite. So this lager is from Cigar City Brewing, which is out of Tampa, Florida. It's 4.5% alcohol, so it's a nice low ABV. Really exciting. You guys are some of the first people to ever try this beer. So they just reformulated it. It's a German-style light lager. They just released this into the market within the last month, so it's one of the few places you can actually get it right now, especially on draft.
I've been wanting to do something like this.
Nice, light, refreshing, easy drinking. And the cider, so for people who don't love beer, if you add cider to the beer, it actually, most people say, oh, it makes it better. So I know a lot of people who aren't beer drinkers who, when you make the snakebite out of it, really do like it.
And on the opposite side, people who don't.
Does anybody have any questions about any of the ciders or the beer?
Is snakebite a common term?
Snakebite is the common term. So snakebite's actually originated in the UK, and it's 1 part lager, 1 part cider. It's also common in the United Kingdom to make a snakebite with a stout too. So both are good to blend it.
What's the most unusual combination that you've personally heard of fruit cider?
Really, none of it seems unusual to me because apple juice and fruit juice make sense together. I did have my favorite one that I had a pink lemonade one, which is pretty tasty, from Vermont. That was probably my favorite one that I've had that's a blend. I like those type of flavors. I like lemonade, so that was a favorite one of mine. Yes?
So outside, I haven't been to the Cider House booth yet. You can either get one of them or you can get a sampling like this?
Yes, great question. So you can either get a 12 ounce of any one of these, or you can get a sample of it. You can get the sampler tray that you have right in front of you.
And you get this little card with it?
And you get the little card that'll tell you the order that they're in and where they're from.
Is there anyone, I'm sorry, is there anybody at the booth that can talk about cider if someone has questions?
Sarah?
They're not as knowledgeable as Nikki, but they do know the basics
Okay.
of all of that.
Fair enough.
Nikki's the expert.
How many cicerones work for Disney?
So the amount of beer server certified cicerones for Disney, if I'm not mistaken, is well above 200 at this point.
Wow.
Yes, that is a huge accomplishment. Yes, there is, and that's a program Disney runs from coast to coast. So they have the Orlando program, and they have a California program that runs that. They have, they actually take their beer classes pretty seriously. They have somebody come in and teach a beer 101. It's a course for 3 weeks for 1 hour a week, and then Disney puts them through the rest of the program after they go through the education.
a mead?
A mead is honey based.
Okay.
Yeah, a mead is fermented honey.
Nikki, how often do you do these seminars?
Whenever Disney asks me to. A couple times a year. So this is, last year, if any of you were here for the beer seminar they did, I was slated to do that one. I had a family emergency and had to fly out of town. So my friend Ian, who I work with, he came out and did it, and you may have met him last year. I do them usually before food and wine, and then I do them for the staff weekly. So.
Is it something you'll introduce for guests to the festival?
So not during Flower and Garden, but during Food and Wine, there is a lot of beverage seminars, and this past year we had probably 8 or 9 that were specifically cider and beer, which was a first. They've always had a few beer ones, but this past year they had quite a few that had great attendance. They brought in breweries from all over the country, brewmasters, who hosted a 45-minute seminar on their products and walked people through, similar to what I've done with you today. Any questions?
In the whole history of alcohol, where does cider and beer follow?
Well, so going back, there's a lot of different history on that I can talk about with beer. Back to early Egyptian documented times. So right about the part when you're on Spaceship Earth, where they start talking about the scrolls and recording history, that's about where beer comes in there. So beer was basically, what would happen is they would have buckets outside, and the rainwater and the yeast and anything floating around would fall in, and they'd have alcoholic beverage, so it was a fermented beverage. It goes back to then. There are a lot of mythological stories about different beers and how they were created, but that became really popular through colonization. So it was very popular in the United Kingdom. Germany, as you all know, is a major producer of beer, but I am proud to say that the United States of America has more breweries than Germany has at this time. We produce more beer because of the craft beer movement than any European country. So we're a pretty big deal when it comes to beer now. Cider again has been popular for the same reasons. It was easy to make, it was accessible, it was a little bit harder for the government to find out you were making it to tax you on it. With beer, they found a way to tax people on beer. You'd have to go buy your spices that you were going to put in your beer from the government, and those were taxed. So that's how beer taxation started coming about. Cider was a little bit harder to tax because if you had apples on your property or some sort of fruit you were fermenting, it was a little bit harder unless somebody knocked on your door and asked what you were, drinking and asked for a taste of it. So it was really popular in the United States until the 1930s. There was a major frost that came through that killed a lot of the apple orchards, and then at the same time Prohibition really kept it at a bay, and it started making a resurgence really in the United States only within the last 10 to 15 years, and now it accounts for a significant portion of the craft segment sales, being only behind IPAs. Any questions?
Nikki, do you have to point out for British guests that cider here is different to cider in the UK? Because to us, cider is hard cider. Because it's either cider or apple juice in the UK, and here
Right.
for cider, you'd have to point out.
So
that
this
it
is hard, right? So this is hard cider. Cider is actually apple juice. Hard cider is alcoholic apple juice, for lack of a better word. So there's a lot of cider mills. For example, in my hometown in upstate New York, we used to go to the cider mill during the fall and get cider donuts and cider out of a cask. And I'm sure, I hope, that it wasn't alcoholic, because we would just pull it and get cider out of it and take it home. We would freeze it for the year and have it all year. But then once you ferment it, so you take that same juice and ferment it, you can have that. Now, one of the things too, we talked about the yeast. So yeast is super important to all alcohol. It's what the yeast is a living organism, so it has to eat. And it eats the sugars. So whether those sugars are from malts and beer, or those sugars are from the apples or other fruit or grapes, it eats the sugars, and its byproduct of the yeast is CO2, which is the bubbles, and alcohol. So naturally occurring, that's how alcohol and CO2 happen. Now, because we talked about how a lot of apples already have the natural yeast occurring, one of the things that some cideries do is they add a little bit of yeast to it. So for example, the Sonoma cider, I know that they add a champagne yeast to it to give it a very tight champagne bubble-like feel. So that's how the different bubbles come about, by adding the different type of yeast to it. So Sonoma does use the champagne yeast. Any other questions?
Thank you.
You guys enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.